day I came home early and walked in to find my husband whispering to someone on the phone. I wasn't supposed to be home that early. Normally I'd be stuck in traffic, exhausted from work, already dreading making dinner. But that day, things wrapped up sooner than expected. I grabbed coffee on the way home, excited at the rare chance to just relax before the kids got home. The second I walked through the front door, I knew something was off. The house was too quiet. No TV playing in the background, no faint hum of music from my husband's office, just silence, except for the soft murmur of a voice coming from down the hall. At first I thought he was on a work call, but as I stepped closer, I realized his tone wasn't the usual clipped, professional one he used when talking to coworkers. It was softer, lower, intimate. I stopped just outside the office door, my stomach twisting. "Can't wait to see you again," he was saying. "Last night was incredible. I keep thinking about—" I didn't hear the rest. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. For a moment I stood there, frozen in place, gripping my coffee cup so tightly my fingers ached. My brain struggled to process what I was hearing. This isn't happening. This isn't real. But it was. He was talking to someone, whispering to them like he used to whisper to me, the way he hadn't in years. I pushed the door open without knocking. He jerked upright, his face going pale as he saw me standing there. The phone was still in his hand, but he fumbled to end the call. "Hey, you're home early," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I stared at him, my mind racing. Who were you talking to? His grip tightened around the phone. "No one, just a work call." I let out a breath, trying to steady myself. "A work call?" I repeated. "You sure about that?" He hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough to confirm what I already knew. I took a step closer. "Put your phone down." His jaw tightened. "You don't trust me?" The laugh that bubbled up had no humor in it. "Should I?" He exhaled sharply and set his phone on the desk. "You're being paranoid." I picked up the phone before he could stop me. The screen was still open to his call history. The last number wasn't saved as a contact, but it had been called multiple times over the past few days. I tapped on it before he could react. A woman's voice answered. "Hey, baby, you miss me already?" The room spun. I turned the speaker on before he could snatch the phone away. "Say that again," I said, my voice eerily calm. Silence. Then a sharp inhale from the other end. "Who is this?" I looked straight at him. His wife. The line went dead. For a long moment neither of us spoke. He just stood there staring at me, his face unreadable. I waited for him to say something. Anything. But all he did was open and close his mouth like he was trying to come up with an excuse. My hand shook, but I wasn't going to break. Not in front of him. I set the phone down carefully like it wasn't the grenade that had just blown my life apart. "How long?" I finally asked. He swallowed. "It's not what you think." "How long?" He looked away. "A few months?" "A few months. Months, while I had been working late, making sure our kids had everything they needed, keeping our home together, he had been sneaking around behind my back. My chest felt tight, but I refused to cry. "You let me sleep next to you every night while you were doing this?" His shoulders tensed. "I never meant for it to—" I held up a hand. "Don't. Just don't." He had already taken enough from me. He wasn't going to take my dignity, too. I turned and walked out of the office, ignoring the sound of him calling my name. I needed space. Needed to breathe. Needed to think. But one thing was already clear. Everything had just changed. I stood there, gripping the counter so hard my fingers ached. My mind was a tangled mess of thoughts I couldn't untangle fast enough. The moment I had walked in and heard him whispering on the phone, something inside me told me this wasn't normal. This wasn't some work call. This wasn't a conversation with a friend. It was something else. Something that had no place in a marriage. He had looked startled when he saw me, his body tensing like a kid caught sneaking out past curfew. He hadn't expected me home yet. He hadn't planned for this. That much was obvious. And now he was scrambling, trying to figure out how to explain something he never thought he'd have to. "I didn't hear you come in," he said, his voice carefully controlled. I didn't respond right away. My eyes flicked toward his phone, still in his hand. He followed my gaze, then slowly set it on the counter. He was trying to act natural, but there was nothing natural about any of this. "Who were you talking to?" I finally asked, keeping my voice as even as I could. He hesitated, just for a second. A normal person wouldn't have caught it, but I wasn't a normal person. I was his wife. I had known him for years, had memorized every little quirk, every little shift in behavior, and that hesitation told me everything. "No one," he finally said. "Just a coworker." A coworker. Right. Because coworkers spoke in hushed tones like that. because coworkers made men look guilty when they were caught talking to them. I wasn't stupid. I studied him, waiting to see if he'd say more. He didn't. He just stood there, pretending that was the end of it, like I was supposed to nod and move on with my day. But I wasn't moving on. "Which coworker?" I asked. He shifted slightly. Barely perceptible, but I saw it. "Why does it matter?" I let that hang in the air between us. He was stalling. He didn't have an answer because he hadn't expected me to push, but he should have known me better than that. "I just think it's strange," I said. "You were whispering." His jaw tensed. "I wasn't whispering." I let out a small breath through my nose. "You were." His fingers curled against the counter, his posture going rigid. "You're overreacting." And there it was. The classic deflection, make me feel crazy, make me doubt myself, shift the conversation away from the real issue. I had seen it before, had watched other women fall for it, had told myself that if I was ever in their position, I wouldn't. I wouldn't be that woman. I took a step forward, arms crossed. "If it's nothing, let me see your phone." His expression didn't change right away. For a moment, he just stood there, and I knew he was running through every possible way out of this. Then, slowly, he reached for his phone. He picked it up, but instead of handing it to me, he held it in his palm. "What?" he said, feigning confusion. "You don't trust me?" Trust. What a joke. "I just want to see—" His thumb hovered over the screen, like he was debating something. Then in one quick motion, he turned the phone so I could see the screen, but it was already on the home page. No open messages, no call log. I looked up at him. He met my gaze with forced innocence, as if I hadn't just watched him clear something before showing me. "You deleted it," he scoffed, shaking his head. "Are you serious right now?" "Who was it?" I asked again. My voice wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, it was calm, even, and that seemed to rattle him more than anything. "I already told you. A coworker, yeah," I cut in. "Which one?" His mouth opened, then shut. He was running out of ways to spin this, and he knew it. For a long time neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick with tension, unspoken words hanging there like weights. And in that silence I realized something. This wasn't just a weird phone call. This wasn't just him acting off. This was something bigger. Something I hadn't prepared myself to face. And then his phone vibrated in his hand. It was like a scene out of a movie. The timing was almost cruel. He flinched at the sound, glancing down instinctively, and I saw it. The name, the message preview. It wasn't a coworker, it was a woman, and her message was short, simple, but it made my stomach twist violently. "Is she home?" My blood went cold. He turned the phone away just as quickly, but it was too late. I had seen it, and I wasn't going to pretend I hadn't. I took a slow step back. "You lied to me." His whole body went stiff. "It's not. Don't—" My voice was sharper than before. "Don't insult me by lying again." He let out a shaky breath, running a hand over his face like he was exhausted, as if he was the victim here, as if I was the one making this difficult. I could feel my pulse in my ears. "Who is she?" He was quiet, too quiet. Then, finally, he spoke. "Her name is—" I held up a hand. "No. I don't care what her name is. I want to know what she is to you." He looked at me then, and for the first time since I had walked through the door I saw something new in his expression. Guilt. Real, undeniable guilt. My hands curled into fists. "How long?" he hesitated. Again, that same tiny pause that told me everything. I already knew the answer. It had been long enough for her to know about me, long enough for her to be nervous about me coming home early, long enough for her to send a message like that. I swallowed against the lump in my throat. "Are you in love with her?" He didn't answer. And that silence? It was louder than any confession could have been. I turned away before he could see the way my face twisted, before he could see how badly this was breaking me, because I refused to let him have that. I walked toward the stairs, needing space, needing air, but he reached out, grabbing my wrist gently, stopping me. "Wait," he said, almost pleading. I looked at his hand, then up at him, and I wondered in that moment how many times he had touched her the same way, how many times he had whispered her name the way he used to whisper mine. I pulled my hand free. I hope she was worth it. Then I walked upstairs, and for the first time since I had met him, I didn't look back. I sat in our bedroom with the door closed, staring at the floor. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of the walls settling, but it felt unnatural, like a silence I wasn't supposed to be sitting in. I could still hear the echo of my own voice from earlier, the cold way I had told him I hoped she was worth it. But now, sitting alone in the same room we had shared for years, I wasn't sure if I even believed those words. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to throw things, to scream, to demand answers that would somehow make this make sense. But all I felt was empty, like something had been pulled out of me, and I was left with a hollow space where trust used to be. Downstairs I heard movement. He was still here. I didn't know why. Maybe he thought I'd come back down, that we could talk, that I'd let him smooth this over the way he had probably done 100 times before with small lies and half-truths. But this wasn't something that could be smoothed over. This wasn't just a fight. It was a fracture. And fractures didn't heal just because someone said I'm sorry. I stood up and walked toward the closet, opening it without thinking. My hands moved on their own, pulling a suitcase from the shelf, placing it on the bed. I unzipped it slowly, staring at the empty space inside. It felt surreal, packing like this, like I was doing something mundane when everything around me was imploding. I started with the essentials: clothes, toiletries, my laptop. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay here. Not in this house. Not with him. Every inch of it suddenly felt foreign, like a place I didn't belong anymore. I was halfway through folding a pair of jeans when I heard footsteps outside the door. He knocked lightly, as if he knew any sudden movement might set me off. "Can we talk?" His voice was quieter than before. He wasn't trying to argue anymore. He knew that wouldn't work. I didn't respond right away. I just kept folding. After a few seconds, he tried again. "Please." I exhaled slowly and turned, gripping the edge of the suitcase. "What is there to talk about?" He hesitated. "I don't want you to leave." I let out a dry laugh, shaking my head. "You already made that choice for me." He stepped inside cautiously, hands shoved in his pockets, like he wasn't sure what to do with them. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Like that made a difference. Like there was some way this could have played out that wouldn't have shattered everything. "How long?" My voice was steady, but my hands weren't. I clenched them into fists at my sides, trying to keep them from shaking. He looked away, running a hand over his face. "Does it matter?" "Of course it matters!" My voice rose, not because I wanted to yell, but because I was barely holding everything in. "I deserve to know how long I've been living a lie." He swallowed, looking like he wanted to be anywhere but here. "A few months." A few months. That was worse than I had even let myself imagine. I nodded, pressing my lips together. "So you've been coming home to me every night, knowing you were lying, knowing you were sneaking around?" He flinched, but didn't deny it. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw someone I didn't recognize anymore. The man I had married wouldn't have done this. The man I had trusted wouldn't have let it go this far. I forced myself to stay calm. Why? He shifted uncomfortably, opening his mouth like he had an answer ready, but then he stopped. His face twisted, and for a second, he actually looked ashamed. "I don't know." I let out a sharp breath, shaking my head. "That's not good enough." He looked desperate now, like he knew he was losing whatever slim chance he had of fixing this. "It wasn't about you." That made something inside me snap. "You don't get to say that," I shot back. "You don't get to cheat on me and then tell me it wasn't about me." He ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated. "I mean, I wasn't unhappy with you. I wasn't trying to hurt you. But you did." My voice was quiet now, but it cut through the air like a blade. "You made a choice, and that choice hurt me. You don't get to act like it was some accident." His shoulders slumped, and for the first time he looked genuinely broken. But I didn't care, not anymore. I turned back to the suitcase, grabbing more clothes and stuffing them inside. "Where are you going?" he asked after a moment. "I don't know," I admitted. "I just know I can't be here." He took a step forward, then stopped like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to close the distance between us. "I love you." I squeezed my eyes shut. "No, you don't." "I do," he insisted, his voice raw. I messed up. I made a mistake." I slammed the suitcase shut and zipped it. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is saying something hurtful in an argument." I turned to him, meeting his eyes. "This was a choice, over and over again, and now you have to live with it." His face crumpled slightly, but I didn't stay to watch. I grabbed my suitcase and walked past him, down the stairs, out the front door. I didn't know where I was going, and I didn't care, because the only thing I knew for sure was that I wasn't coming back. I drove for hours. At first, I thought I had a destination in mind, but the longer I stayed on the road, the more I realized I was just running from the weight of everything. I didn't want to stop because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant feeling, and I wasn't ready for that yet. Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't great, but it was enough. Just somewhere to breathe, to figure out what came next. The woman at the front desk barely looked up as she slid the key across the counter. I wondered if she could see it in my face. The exhaustion, the hurt, the way my whole world had collapsed in the span of a day. The room smelled like stale air and old carpet. The bedspread was an ugly floral pattern, the kind that had probably been there for decades. I tossed my suitcase onto the chair by the window and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. My phone buzzed beside me, and for a second I debated throwing it across the room. I already knew who it was. I didn't check the messages right away. I wasn't ready to see whatever half-hearted excuses or desperate apologies he had sent. Instead, I pulled up my best friend's number and hit call. She picked up on the second ring. "Where are you?" I exhaled, running a hand over my face. "Some crappy motel. I needed to get out." She didn't hesitate. "Send me the address. I'll be there in 15 minutes. I almost told her not to, but the truth was, I didn't want to be alone. Not really. So I sent her the location and sat there in silence, the weight of the day pressing down on me like a boulder. True to her word, she showed up exactly 15 minutes later, knocking twice before pushing the door open like she owned the place. She took one look at me and sighed. "You look like hell." "Feel like it too." She shut the door behind her and flopped onto the bed beside me. "Do I need to kill him? Because I will. I'll make it look like an accident." That actually made me smile, even if just for a second. "I don't think it'd be worth the jail time," she shrugged. Depends on how creative I get." For a while we just sat there, the quiet stretching between us. She didn't push me to talk, and I was grateful for that. I needed space to process, to let the reality of it all settle in. But eventually I found myself speaking anyway. "I don't even know who he is anymore." She nodded, like she understood. "That's the worst part, isn't it? When the person you trusted most becomes a stranger?" I swallowed hard, trying to push past the lump in my throat. He kept saying it wasn't about me. But how can it not be? He chose her. He chose to lie to me. That wasn't an accident. "No, it wasn't," she agreed. "And don't let him make you think it was." I finally reached for my phone, scrolling through the unread messages. They were exactly what I expected. Apologies, explanations, desperate attempts to fix something that wasn't fixable. "I didn't want to hurt you. Please, can we talk? I messed up, but I love you. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." I stared at the screen for a long time, my finger hovering over the keyboard. There was a time when I would have responded immediately, when I would have tried to make sense of it all, to find a way to fix what was broken. But that time was over. I typed out a response, short and to the point. "There's nothing left to talk about. Don't contact me again." Then, before I could second-guess myself, I blocked his number. My best friend glanced over at me. "You okay?" I wasn't sure how to answer that. I didn't feel okay, but for the first time all day I felt lighter, like I had taken the first step towards something better. "I think I will be," she nodded. "Good. Now let's get you out of this depressing-ass motel and into a place that doesn't smell like cigarette smoke and regret." I let out a breath, some of the tension easing from my shoulders. "Sounds like a plan." The next few weeks were hard. Grief was a strange thing. One minute I felt fine, almost normal. Then, out of nowhere, it would hit me like a wave, knocking the air out of my lungs. I mourned the life I thought I had, the future I had envisioned with him. But the more time passed, the more I realized that future had never really existed. It had been a lie, a carefully constructed illusion. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, something just big enough for me and the fresh start I so desperately needed. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, and that meant more than anything. I never responded to his emails, never checked his social media. I didn't want to know what he was doing, if he had moved on, if he was still trying to justify what he had done. None of it mattered anymore. One day, months later, I ran into someone who used to know both of us. They mentioned seeing him around, looking miserable, like he had lost everything. I didn't feel satisfaction in that, just a quiet sense of closure. He had made his choices, and I had made mine, and for the first time in a long time, I knew I had made the right one.